Hey folks, Scott Weingart here, and this is an EMCrit. I guess it's a we, though it's quite a long we. This is a lecture I gave at the Teaching Course in New York City. Rob Rogers' little baby, amazing course on all things academic medicine and education. And this is a talk on how to give a presentation. Well, no, that's not true. This is a talk on how to create a presentation. On how to give a presentation, you should listen to Natalie May from the same conference because her lecture was just wonderful. Before we start, one thing. Next week, if you're listening to this in near real time, I'm going to the University of Michigan to visit Kyle Gunderson and see his EC3, his EDICU. As you know, I have my own EDICU. I want to see how they're doing up there. As part of that little trip, we're going to be doing an Ask Us Anything, which really, I think, will be remarkably beneficial to anyone interested in resuscitation or ED critical care. What's going to happen is Kyle, myself, two other folks from his unit, we're going to get together in front of a live stream camera, and we're going to answer questions tweeted to us in real time, or what you could do right now is you could go to EMCrit.org/AUA. That stands for Ask Us Anything. EMCrit.org/AUA. And it'll take you to Reddit, and you could put any questions or comments you have there in the Reddit. And if you don't want to put any of your own, you could upvote or downvote the ones that are already there, and we'll take the ones at the top, and we will answer them for the live stream next week. And then we'll take that live stream, and we'll actually put it up on EMCrit. So even if you can't watch it in real time, you can watch it asynchronously. Okay, enough. Go to EMCrit.org/AUA, put questions about EDICUs and ED critical care, and if they're good questions, we'll answer them. Scott Weingart, EMCrit Podcast, saying, learn to give a good presentation so I don't have to be bored. Here we go. Boom, boom. Thanks, Rob. This is far less regimented than the first talk because that was live streaming. It was the John Hines Memorial Lecture. I just wanted that to be tight. This, I want full interaction. I want to talk to you guys. I want to hear your thoughts. Here's what the next hour and a half is going to look like potentially. We're going to talk a little bit about creating presentations. Then we're going to talk just a brief bit about really taking it to the next level and achieving mastery or really high-level presentation. We're going to talk about how everyone around you is going to try to ruin your talks with AV mishaps and various other things. I'm going to talk just 2 minutes about the concept of the mind palace, just to really hear your thoughts more than anything else, and I'll explain what that means in just a bit. And then if we have time, and I don't think we will, because I think the discussion on this stuff is going to be filling it up, maybe we'll talk a little bit about getting things done. Do you need something, Ash?
Yeah.
A mic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was this the one that you
I think that's it.
Sorry.
Thank you for reminding me. Used to Lav World. All right, much better. So let's talk about presentation creation. Why do we want to talk about presentation creation? Because I'm sick of sitting through shit presentations. That's why. It's totally for my own benefit. I went to ACEP, which is the American College of Emergency Physicians. And before each talk you give, generally you get there about 20 minutes early and you hear the end of the person before you because you want to be able to run up right away. These talks, with exceptions, were abysmal. Not because of the presenters. These were smart people. They were chosen because they're leaders in their field. It's just their slides were hideous. Their presentation flow was non-existent. Their conclusion was, well, I guess that's it. I guess I'll take questions now. And so I don't want you folks to fall into that same, situation. I want your presentations to sparkle and represent who you are as educators. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, I should make the proviso that I don't believe in presentations as a good way of imparting knowledge. If I had my druthers, everything would be imparted by podcasts. And then the only way I would show up in front of a room of people is we would just do a flipped classroom, which you're going to hear way too much about in the course of this conference. And you could just ask me questions about all the things I said on the podcast. But people don't let me do that at most of these meetings. So I'm still forced to give presentations, even though I think they're an inferior form. All right, if you have questions that come up in the course of this, just send them to @EMCrit, hashtag at TTC NYC15 so that the folks in back could latch on as well. Now, I want to introduce someone, and Swami already mentioned her, but Nat May. Nat, stand up for a sec. Nat May is spectacular, and she is a master of presentation creation, presentation design. And so she's going to help facilitate this. She's going to field the questions with me and lead. She's going to put in her own unique viewpoint on the things we're going to talk about. So let's talk about the steps of presentation creation. The first step is to drag a folder. Now, what do I mean by this? If you take no other tip from this talk, this may help you. Every time I give a presentation, or I've been asked to give a presentation rather, the first thing I do is I have a template folder that I drag to my desktop from wherever it sits, and I just go to Copy New, and now I have a folder. Oh, yep, let me slide wankers. Oh no.
It's mirroring.
No, there we go. No, I know. It just, it gave me that fear that it was not going to hit. Okay, so in this folder is everything I need for this presentation that I'm going to create. I have a templated PowerPoint that has the slides I like. It has my @EMCrit Twitter slide. It has the fonts I want already there. It has everything sized. And now if I double click this, I am set. I am ready to give, I'm ready to design my slides. You know, it has all my stuff there. And as you get into this design, you realize like it takes a lot of work to start with a fresh PowerPoint and make it the way you want. But if you took one you already liked and you just deleted all the slides and kept a couple to use as templates, you're already way ahead of the game. And it has folders already for any videos that go into the lecture, for recordings of the lecture that I'll talk about later on, images, brainstorming articles. And since if you're in academics, you should understand you should never do anything once. If you do an extensive presentation about something, you should write a review article about it, or you should do a blog post about it, or you should do a podcast about it. You're going to want all your references saved. So I use EndNote, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about reference management a little bit later. But I take all the articles that are in my talk, and I put them into my EndNote library, and could just as easily be any reference management program you like, and now they're there for me in a form I could use them for all sorts of other stuff. And you're really just building these reusable teaching objects to be able to be used for all sorts of things you're going to want in the course of whatever the subject is. So I've dragged the folder now, and it's sitting there. And I don't do this when I'm actually ready to design the slides, which is usually, a couple weeks beforehand. I do this the second I know I'm going to be giving a talk. Because once I have that there, I now have a place to put everything that accumulates. Otherwise, it just goes in these disparate places, and you're not going to have it when you're actually ready to work on the talk. So drag the folder. The next thing is to decide on your topic. And what this really comes down to is scope and time. When I'm trying to teach residents how to conceptualize a presentation, it's always scope that they fail on. The first time many residents have to present in front of their residency is like a morbidity and mortality rounds. And you talk about a case for 40 minutes, and then they get an 8-minute slot where they're supposed to impart some knowledge on the group. And for some reason, there's an inevitability that they will try to present the entirety of how to manage a sepsis patient in those 8 minutes. And that's not possible, nor is it interesting, because it's a problem of scope. In general, in photography, if you want to make a photograph interesting, what do? You zoom in. You get as close as possible because that's where the interest lies. It's the same thing for presentations in general. You have to zoom in until you find something manageable to your time that's going to be of interest. And you also need to evaluate your own knowledge. So that second-year resident couldn't talk about the entirety of sepsis. But in those 8 minutes, they probably could become incredibly knowledgeable about the current thoughts on steroids for sepsis. And they could read the 3 or 4 articles that are actually out there and give a concise presentation on that. That's zooming in to a small topic that they can gain rapid expertise on and actually impart something beneficial to the group. And this is what you have to do every time you're conceptualizing a presentation, is decide on scope. In general, if the scope you've decided on is a full-on review of a topic, your lecture is going to suck. And I've seen a few, but there's very few just these, rambling, full topic discourses that are in any way interesting. You have to zoom in. The next thing to ask yourself is boardroom versus ballroom. And this is from a gentleman named Andrew Abella, who does a lot of work on presentation design. And he has understood and now really put into words that the presentation you're going to give to a large auditorium full of people is very different than the one you're going to do to a small residency, or a group of 4 people on the C-suite level of the hospital that you have to convince on about a new program. And the way you present is entirely different. These lectures basically are to inspire. You're not going to teach very much. If they walk out of that lecture with 2 learning points, you've actually been remarkably successful. And you have to understand that if you try to teach them for 30 minutes solid, that lecture is going to fall flat. You can't do that to a group of 2,000 people at SMAC. Your main goal is to inspire, to make people laugh, to make them think, and then that's it. This group, on the other hand, because it's small and because you can interact, you could go much more in depth. You could really talk through the subtleties of things, and you design your lecture accordingly. You have to ask yourself, who is your audience? And for that, it would be wonderful to get some demographics, to know who your audience is and what they want. For instance, for this conference, Rob sent me a list of all of you with your jobs, what geographic area you're from in the country, what your learning objectives are. He took the time to cross-reference that with the published literature of the learning needs of people at your level and sent this all out to all the faculty. No, actually, he didn't do any of that shit. I have no idea who you people are. And that's a problem, because I don't know exactly where you are. I gave a talk for the first one about emergency medicine. But if I find out that 70% of you are IM, internal medicine, that lecture is going to fall flat. And I wish I had known that. I always try to know who I'm going to be speaking to and gear the lecture accordingly. And then I mentioned time. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more later on in this lecture. But the time you have gears your discussion. How many folks know about the Essentials of Emergency Medicine Conference? Yeah. Mel Herbert, leader in medical education. Mel has now basically boiled it down to you could have a 5-minute lecture or you could have a 10-minute lecture. That's it. There's no more hours. There's no more 40 minutes. There's not even the 20s we used to have. That's an entirely different lecture style than what I'm doing now, which is I get to talk to you guys for an hour and a half. You have to be tight and incredibly well rehearsed to give a 5-minute lecture. And so that's going to gear how you're going to do the presentation as well. So this is what you're all thinking about at the beginning when you're trying to decide what should I talk about. Any questions thus far? Yes, sir.
Would you mind sharing your template folder?
Okay, so thank you for that. And now I need a volunteer, and you might be that person. I need someone to record all the crap I say I'm going to give you so that I could actually give it to you. Would you be willing to do that for me? Would you just be willing to type that in? So type in there, give us your template folder, and then I will get you guys that afterwards. Because I'm going to talk about a lot of stuff, and I will provide these slide sets, but for stuff like that, if it goes down on your list, then absolutely I will get that to you.
And my second question. Do you create a new EndNote library for each presentation?
Yes, because the way EndNote works, if you put everything together, it is a cluster. Fuck it, I'm cursing during it. It's a clusterfuck. And other programs, these are all reference manager programs. If you're in academics and haven't found yours, it's time. I'll talk about them briefly during the Mind Palace stuff. But for EndNote, if you create a new file for each one, that stuff is now firewalled from everything else. And you know, if you go into your folder, all of the references that you want for that are there, and they're not going to get messed up. All right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
On your slides where you always have the references at the bottom,
yeah.
Just pull that from EndNote?
I don't. I basically am putting them on the slide and then putting them in EndNote at the same time is the way I'm doing that. That's my workflow. And we'll talk about those references on the bottom and whether they're good or not. But that's the way I do it, is when I put a reference on a slide, then I pop it into EndNote. Yes?
How often do you use animations in your presentations?
I'm going to get to that exact question. All right. Do you have anything to say at this stage, Nat? Or should we? All right. All right. Then the next thing is to actually have an idea whole. All right? You need an idea hole. What does that mean? As soon as you drag that folder and then just gave a brief amount of time thinking about your topic, your subconscious is going to start working on your presentation for you. It will happen automatically. And the more you do presentations, the more this process is going to take, is going to actually occur. You will start building the ideas. And when you first get this topic, you might be saying to yourself, I have no idea how I'm going to handle this. I have no idea what I want to talk about. They assigned me a topic because I'm going to talk about this, something about at a national conference, and I have no idea. Your mind will do the work for you. If you allow it to, and then you actually record the things you come up with. You need a place to put the ideas. And as soon as you have an idea, you need to put it there. Or if you can't get to your idea hole, you need to actually write it on a piece of paper that is not going to get lost, and then transfer it to your idea hole. And this is a horrible term, but I just like saying it. And if you keep doing that, your subconscious will work on it even more. It will start making connections. It will start really just building the talk for you. I mean, I know this sounds like an infomercial. It's true. Your brain is really, really good at this shit if you let it work. So I have two kinds of idea holes. If I have to give a purely inspirational lecture, then I use a mind map. How many folks have ever touched a mind map? All right, these are great because they really resonate for connections and pictorial representation of ideas. And if you can make them beautiful like this, I can't. This is not mine. I just took this off the internet. Mine look like crap, but this is beautiful. And you know the guy who actually invented mind maps. There's an entire book. It's by Tony. Does anyone know the last name? Yeah, beautiful. Can you put that on the list, my friend? Get the mind mapping book reference. He has an entire conceptual framework why this is good. But this is how I actually do just inspirational talks, things without a lot of references. I just want to make people think. And for this, you just put an idea anywhere on the mind map, and then you could do the connections later on. And you could decide, well, it was connected to the central idea, but really it's better underneath a hierarchy of something else. You just drag it and move it, assuming you're doing it the way I do, which is with a computer program. I use iThoughts HD on my Mac, and I think that's on my iPod as well. MindMeister is another one, but I'll get you a whole list of them. They all do, at my level, the same thing. You know, when you look at the difference between these mind mapping programs, it's stuff you don't care about. So any of them work. They're dirt cheap. You can get them for $1 for your iPad, and all of a sudden you can just drop ideas anywhere, which is the concept of an idea hole, and figure out how they relate or work later on. And eventually, as you keep moving stuff around over the course of a couple weeks or a couple months, depending on how much lead time you have, all of a sudden things start making sense how your talk's going to be organized. If I actually have to do a talk where it's science-based, clinical medicine, then I don't use a mind map, I use an outline. And I use a program called Workflowy because it's on the web and I can get to it anywhere. And it works, there's native Apple iOS apps. I think they have Android apps as well. But this means I can access my outline everywhere. Now, I was going to click and show you this, but I'm really worried about what's happening with the computer, and I don't want to mess with anything. So I'll show you the outline I made for the Resus Wankers talk, and you can take a look at that. I'll get you that today, and see that I just kept dropping articles. I kept dropping ideas. Now, the beauty of an outlining program as opposed to a word processing program is a good outlining program will allow you to move things around to get that same hierarchical reorganization later on. Don't lock yourself into trying to figure out how things are going to fit together. That's not how an idea hole works. The way an idea hole works is just shove everything you could possibly think about in there, and then you'll work out the connections later. And some of it will disappear, some of it you'll say not relevant, or we don't have enough time for this, but you'll start having a place to drop everything that could even tangentially work, and your mind will do the work for you, and then you'll be able to organize later on. So I like Workflowy because it's omnipresent, but one that actually has Omni in its name. If you're an Apple guy or gal, Omni Outliner is even better, and it also is available on your devices. The program's amazing. Unfortunately, my primary computer is a PC, which is why I don't choose to use that and use Workflowy instead. But have somewhere you could drop all your ideas to allow unconscious processing to actually do the work for you. And a lot of the best ideas I have, and I think this is probably common amongst a lot of the faculty, is in the shower. For some reason, that's just an incredibly relaxing time. The water's pounding on your head. The worries of the day kind of fade away, and all of a sudden, I'll have an idea. I actually have a waterproof notebook and a Sharpie next to the shower. That's how committed I am to letting this unconscious processing never go to waste. When an idea pops in your head, I'm too old, and I'm not even that old, so it's probably worse for the gray hairs in the room, to ever leave something locked into my memory and hope I'm going to remember it when I finally, get somewhere and actually record it. You will find, as time goes on, you are not capable of doing that. Someone will cause a task interruption, a slip, and that idea is gone. And once that's gone, you may never get it back, and it may have been a super potent idea. So let the unconscious processing work, and then put it down somewhere, and eventually get it in your idea hole. Any questions about that? All right. Now we start dealing with organization and structure. This is after you've gotten your outline, your mind map, you've gotten the ideas you want to feed into the talk. Now you're going to start figuring out how you're going to put those things together. And there's a lot of structures you could use. If I'm trying to convince people of something, I generally use the problem-solution structure, which is you actually tell people what the situation is, why things are bad, and then how you feel it should be solved. Now, if you're going to do a debate, and these are fun and they're becoming more and more present, then I go a step further on the problem-solution structure and actually line up my opponent's arguments as well, and then shoot them down. And if you go first and you could just cut their knees out from under them and say everything they were going to say and the reasons why, that's even more potent. If you're going to inspire, there's no better way than the classic story arc, the classic story structure. And this is so absolutely stereotypical that once you learn this, once you do any reading about classic story structure, it's going to screw up a lot of movies and novels for you, because you're going to realize, this is just the perfect representation of what they've decided, messes with your minds and makes a story interesting. So, classic story arc is you have stasis, you have someone just living their ordinary lives. How many movies have you seen? Every movie, they're just doing their normal thing. And then there's a crisis, something changes, and a good movie will have multiple crises, and then eventually you have climax, you have learning, you have the person bettering themselves, and then denouement. They go back, they do something else. This is, the classic hero arc. That's what this is. You could use that to make your presentation, because you have proof over the course of hundreds of years that this works for the human brain. And then if you're going to talk about the history of something, and I never would, then the chronological structure. Okay. In your organization, you have to accept something. And most people will not accept it. You folks in the room hopefully will. You could take in 20 minutes of information. You could listen to 20 minutes of lecture, and that's it. That's it. That's all you could take in. After that, you're going to start looking at your iPhone. You're going to start searching Twitter. You're not going to be capable of taking in any more information. You could buy 20 minutes. 20 minutes is probably an overestimation. But that's the max. 20 minutes. That's all you get from your audience. And that's if you're good. If you suck, you get 3 minutes. Get 20 minutes. But they gave you an hour talk. What do you do? How do you fix that? You got to build into your organization the concept of change-ups. You got to reset their brain. You have to get them back to give you another 20 minutes. It's been studied. I'll give you guys the references. But this is the beginning of the talk. By the 20-minute mark, this is like the 10-minute mark. Tension's at a lull. Towards the end, when they think there may be some freedom, they may be getting out of here. What do I need to do as an assignment? Maybe I'll start paying attention again. You have to take that into account. You have to hit the reset button. You have to do change-ups every 10 to 20 minutes. Just do something else. If I was smart, we've been talking for about 20 minutes. I should make you guys all do a group exercise. I should make you talk amongst yourselves. I should show a funny video. I'm not going to do any of that. But that's what I should do. If I was following my own advice, we'd do something else right now, because you're at a lull, right? I should basically take a coffee break right now, and you guys would be reset. Use this. If someone gives you a 60-minute time slot, you can't give a 60-minute lecture. You could give your intro, you could tell them what you want them to come out with, and then do 3 20-minute lectures. Or in this case, this is like a 40-minute talk. Do 3 10-minute lectures. Transition, segue between them. Put Q&A in between each. That's kind of a reset. People get to talk. People give their own experiences. And then finish up. That's how you build a lecture. You build them in chunks of 10 to 20 minutes. And if that's not your organization, if your organization is 60 minutes straight through, you're screwed. Now this slide demonstrates one other thing, which is, in the presentation world in general, threes are very potent. Threes are potent for so much of the way we impart information. Our brain likes threes. So if you could break your lecture up into 3 chunks with an intro and an end, you have a very nice structure. There was a guy named Cliff Atkinson, and he actually, I read this in 2005. It was right as I started my attending. It was the perfect time to read this book. The later editions of it suck. He's become like being paid by Microsoft, so it's all about PowerPoint design and not about creating story. It's still in there, but if you get the first edition of this book, Beyond Bullet Points, he actually gives you a template. What's the setting? What's your audience? Who's the protagonist? And here's a little hint. The protagonist is always the audience. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. The protagonist of anything you do should be you, not me. That's incredibly important. So who's the protagonist? What is the imbalance? What crisis, what problem are they facing? How are you going to fix it? And then actually go into your talk. And now if you were giving a 20-minute talk, it'll be 3 blocks of 5. If you're giving an hour-long talk, it's 3 blocks of 15. And so on and so on. But you're chunking into threes based on your time. And you just will go in terms of your scope based on the time. So if you have a 10-minute lecture, then you can either do one thing, very detailed, or you can do 3 things with a general scope. And this structure was what I used at the beginning of my presentation career and was remarkably successful. I'll get you this. All right. So then you actually want to do a rehearsal. You've created your organization. You have your ideas. You want to, by yourself at this point, actually go through and say it out loud. And you have to say it out loud. You can't say it in your head. The act of actually doing your presentation with you speaking will lead you to understand this was really hard for me to get out. It's probably complicated. If it's hard for me to get out, there's no way the audience is going to get it. You're going to start building in the transition phrases that will get you from one place to another. The more you do that, the more those become natural. And the mark of a fantastic speaker is not their information, it's how they transition between information. And that's what you're building by saying it out loud. And you're also getting a realistic impression of your time, of how long it's actually going to take to get that out. And you might, at this rehearsal number 1, before anyone's seen it, realize I'm trying to give a 3-hour talk in the span of 20 minutes. And so say it out loud. If you really want to do it right, stand up and say it out loud. Record yourself. Even if you throw that recording away, record yourself during this rehearsal, because you might realize the next day, oh, wait, there was a really good line in there that I wanted. Now you have the tape. Memory is the cheapest thing in the world right now. You could get a 3 terabyte hard drive for the cost of, basically what it was a cup of coffee. It's insane. There's no reason not to make use of this. If you guys need recorder recommendations, I'm happy to provide those later on, and I'll tell you what you could get for like $70 that will serve you through your entire academic career for anything you want. But you got to rehearse out loud by yourself, and what you're trying to get is timing and the flow of ideas. Do they mesh? Do they transit well? Okay, now you might want to consider at this point, after you've gone and revised, doing rehearsal number 2 and actually trying again and seeing how it works out. This sounds really complicated and work intensive. It is. But that's what your audience deserves. That's what you should be doing if people are going to come and pay good money to listen to you. So I'll do a second rehearsal before anyone actually hears it, just based on flow of ideas. You'll note, at this point, I haven't even touched PowerPoint. PowerPoint is not part of these first 2 rehearsals. This is merely how do I look at my outline or my mind map and talk about this stuff. All right. Now, after that second rehearsal, we're ready to build our PowerPoint framework. All right? We're ready to actually start building our slide deck. And the other thing we're going to build in at this point, as we're doing this, is I'm going to put the information in there, but how do I build what the audience really wants, which is emotion, evidence, and stories? This is what's going to make your presentation shine. How do I build this stuff in? And this is what you're going to be asking yourself as you're actually creating your deck, is where am I going to put these things? Because if you don't concentrate on this early on, there's not going to be space for it. But these things are probably more important than the information you impart. So Aristotle laid this all out in his book on rhetoric. This stuff we knew thousands of years ago. And it still holds today. These are the three things every talk needs. You need pathos, the emotional value, the potency that's going to hit you on a visceral level. You need ethos. Does the presenter have internal and external authority? And that goes into things like, I know that person. I've listened to their stuff. I trust them. Well, I'm already starting because I'm in a very lucky position where a lot of the people who listen to the podcast will believe me before I open my mouth when I get up here and talk. If you're a new speaker that no one's heard of, you have to establish that yourself. You have to build that in the course of your presentation. And that's going to go into things like not dressing the way I do. You go to a national meeting, you wear a suit if you're a guy. You wear professional clothing if you're a woman. I don't, because I'm banking on the ethos I've already set up. But you don't go like this to a national conference if you're starting off as a speaker, because you're ruining your external authority. All right? And then the things you say have to inspire trust. And then logos are actually the meaning, the information on the clinical stuff if you're giving a clinical talk, or on the educational theories if that's the talk you're giving. So all three of these need to be present, and you need to build these in. And during your talk creation, you have to ask yourself, do I hit all three of these? Otherwise, I have to change something. Any questions about that thus far? Anything you want to add, Nat?
No, I agree completely.
Okay. All right. Now, there's a guy named Rich Borden. He wrote a fantastic book that's out of print. I'll get you guys the reference. Could you put that in your file, my friend? Thank you so much. And he said this a little bit differently, but it applies the same. Every time you are creating your talk, you should ask yourself these 4 questions in order. And in fact, the way you should do it is imagine your audience saying these things. So, my friend, can you say the first one there?
Ho-hum.
Ho-hum. Boring. This is not interesting enough. You're not captivating me. How do I fix that? Number 2.
Why bring that up?
Okay, so why are you telling me this? What about this fact is going to be important to my practice? When you ask yourself that question, you don't just give the information. You take your protagonist, the audience, and actually say, how are they going to use this? How is this going to change their life? How is this going to change their medical practice? Number 3.
For instance,
give examples. Don't just say something. Actually give a story about how it works, or how to actually make it happen, or how to actually operationalize that at the bedside. And then last but not least,
so what?
So what? What's the overall message you want me to leave with? And if you don't have that in your mind when you're creating your talk, you're already hosed. I want every single person in this audience to leave giving a good presentation. So when I have to sit through 20 minutes of your talk at ACEP before my talk starts, I'm interested. That is the sole reason, and that is what I want you to leave with. So that's my so what. So you ask yourself these 4 questions. Then you're also going to add in the rhetorical flourishes. You're going to add in the actual verbiage to make it sound good. You're going to consider it now. You're going to keep actually etching that throughout your presentation creation, but you're going to try to build those in now. And then stories. Stories are incredibly important. If you're giving a talk and you're not telling stories, you're already missing out on one of the most important things you could do in the course of the presentation. And Nat exemplifies this. Simon Carley, you're going to hear from, exemplifies this. Their talks contain stories, and those stories are programmed into the human mind to captivate. Ira Glass said it best. The power of the anecdote is so great. No matter how boring the material is, if it's in story form, there's suspense. It feels like something's going to happen. The reason why is because literally, it's a sequence of events. You could feel through its form that it's inherently like being on a train that has a destination and that you're going to find something at the end of the journey. Stories work in presentations. If you give one and don't tell a story at some point, you're missing out. And then you're going to go and actually work on these three things. You have all your information down. You're going to spend as much time as it took to actually put all your information into slides on working on your opening, your closing, and your segues. The opening. If it sucks, you've already lost your ethos. The audience doesn't want to pay attention to you. You might be able to get it back, but it's going to be a struggle. Make your opening hit. Figure out a way to captivate your audience from the first moment you get up there. And you practice your opening more than any other part of your talk. And then your closing. This is what the people are going to remember. It could have been the best talk in the world. If your closing sucks, if you say, oh yeah, I guess that's all I got for you. I'm happy to take any questions. They're going to leave deflated. Your audience is going to leave feeling not great. You want them to feel pumped. You want them to feel like, oh my God, that was an amazing lecture. And the way that happens is not by happenstance. The way that happens is by building it in. Who is the best closer in emergency medicine?
Big brother.
Yeah, pretty good. I would say Cliff Reed, though. Cliff Reed closes better than anyone else. He leaves you crying or laughing or something. He doesn't do that by chance. Cliff works his ass off on his openings and closings. And when you watch him creating a presentation, and I have, he spends more time on this than everything else combined. How am I going to open? How am I going to close? And then how am I going to move between the parts of my talk so it's seamless, so I reinforce the points just made and open it up to the points I want to make. And I have this link here because I'm going to give you this slide set, and you'll find 10 ways to end your talk with power. I'm not going to go through it now. Okay, so now you have your slide deck. You have something you think is pretty good. And when you've gotten to this point, and I just think this is cool, I'm not supposed to do this because it's kind of just an aside and that actually takes away from the main point, but I just think it's so cool that everything we've done, these three in white here, were discussed by Cicero in Roman times. Everything we're talking about today, there's nothing new. He talked about inventio, invention, conceptualizing your talk. Dispositio, arrangement, actually putting the ideas together. Elocutio, your style, the rhetorical flourishes, the story. And then memoria, practicing the talk enough so that it's locked into your head and you no longer need to concentrate on it. And then actio, delivery. And we'll talk about these last two in the course of this. Are there any questions thus far? All right, now you might have guessed it, but now it's time for rehearsal number 3. Rehearsal number 3 is you actually giving it to someone else. Now this unfortunately falls to my wife. She's an anesthesiologist. She has to listen to all these talks about subjects she doesn't particularly care about. But she's not evaluating the information. She's evaluating all the other stuff I've been telling you about. And you could have guessed it, this is going to be recorded. I highly advise you to videotape it at this point if you can, because you're going to want to watch yourself and see what you're doing with your body, see about how you're actually moving. So you're going to do all of that in front of someone. If you go and give a talk to a big audience and you've never given that talk before, you're an idiot. There's no way you could be good and give an excellent presentation unless you've been doing it for a couple decades. Really just doing ad hoc presentations. You could do it eventually if you've done this long enough. But even those folks will never be as good as if they tried it at least once in front of another person. And you're going to evaluate all of the things you have until this point. You're going to ask them for tips on your slides. Do they work? Do they make sense? And Nat's going to give an entire extensive lecture on how to produce slides, so I'm not going to discuss it more than just one thing, which is there's 2 rules to fix any slide deck. I could take any of the slide decks from even the worst presenters, could take them right now, and with 2 rules, I think I can make them dramatically better. If you take every single slide they give you and cut and paste it down to the notes section, and just leave a blank screen there, as rule number 1. And rule number 2, you take every graphic, chart, picture they have and blow it up to full screen, and if at that point the resolution's shitty, you throw it away. That's a 100% effective slide deck. Now, they might have a lot of black screen. That's okay. It's like they'll actually be speaking to you as opposed to reading their slides. If you did that to any slide deck out there, I would say you're 90% of the way there. So this is not tough stuff. All the beautiful techniques that you're going to learn this afternoon, wonderful. They'll enhance your message. But if you just did those 2 things, you're 90% of the way there. Take everything that's bullet pointed, large amounts of text, copy them to the notes, and then blow up every picture. You got a slide deck that you could use. Now, my entire presentation production was changed when I listened to a lecture by Lawrence Lessig. Has anyone ever heard Lawrence Lessig talk? He created Creative Commons. He's a Harvard attorney who really cares about issues in the copyright space. Not particularly interesting to most folks, but his lecture style, for me, was game-changing. Here's how Lawrence lectured about free culture. And I'm sorry, even though he's the Creative Commons guy, every good resolution copy of this video, for some reason, has been taken off the internet. So this is like a really shitty bootleg version. I don't know why. It's kind of weird that some guy that's talking about freeing everything, freeing all information, doesn't have this talk up there. But look at this.
So I've been doing this for about 2 years. More than 100 of these gigs. This is about the last one. One more, and it's over. Right? And I figured I wanted to write a song to end it, right? But then I realized I don't sing and I can't write music.
So his entire talk, tiny words, 1 to 2, maybe 3 or 4 words on the screen. And that's it. No graphics, nothing. You might have noted by now that's my presentation style as well for the most part. I would argue that your PowerPoint deck is not essential. That what is essential is your message and not letting this screw you up. He gave a 30-minute talk with not a single image in it that I thought was wonderful, because he was not reading his bullet points, because there were no bullet points. It was just a couple words on the slide. And they were there to cue the audience back in if they stopped paying attention for a second, and to remind him of where he is in the talk, which he shouldn't have even needed that latter one, because he should have already been at the point where he memorized, and I'm sure Lawrence Lessig did. This is called the Takahashi method. It was actually invented by a guy, somehow you guessed this, is named Takahashi in Japan. And these are kanji, which are graphic by their very nature. But he would just use slides like these on the right. I mean, this is considered bullet points in Japanese slide presentation, even though it looks 1,000 times better than ours. And he got to the point where it's just this, right? Just a couple characters, and that was his slide deck. That's what I do. So it does not need to be an extensive work to create a PowerPoint deck. It needs to be extensive amounts of work to create a PowerPoint message. And again, these slides go back to the discussion I had with you before about boardroom versus ballroom. If you're speaking to a small group, you could put much more technical, extensive slides. In fact, you probably should, because they're going to want justification. They're going to want, graphs that they could really look at. And that's not going to work in a group of 2,000 where you're trying to inspire. So you actually change your slide design based on your audience. If you want to read more about this book, Multimedia Learning by Richard Mayer, goes through all the science behind what works and what doesn't for multimedia presentations, and it's a wonderful book. I will give you the take-home really quick. If you have audio plus a convergent visual, meaning what you have on the screen makes sense in the course of what you're saying, it's more potent than the audio alone. So me just speaking with nothing, I gain a little bit by having slides, as long as the slides make sense with my message. But audio plus verbatim visual, meaning bullet points that I'm reading off one by one, detract from learning. You actually get net negative. You'd be much better off just not having those bullet points there at all. And then also, what is a net negative is audio plus a divergent visual. And this is what I see a lot of people, they hear this new presentation design I see them doing, is just putting up random pictures. I need a picture up there, it's nice and graphic. No, that actually hurts you. Don't do it. There's a lady named Nancy Duarte who is, her whole career is slide design. And she created something called sliduments, or slide docs, which are actually PowerPoint decks whose purpose is for people who don't hear the presentation to actually be able to look at and get the full message. And you can see these things are beautiful, they're still lovely. You would never want to make these slides to present to an audience, but if you wanted to hand your PowerPoint deck out to someone, they could look at this and actually get your full message. Maybe not as good as if you were giving the talk. So you can create a PowerPoint deck that will do that, but it can't be both. It can't be your presentation slides and capable of being handed out. And when people try to do that, that's where the fail goes. And so there's a constant refrain in presentation design, which is your slides are not your speaking prompts, which are not your handouts. All three of those exist entirely independently. Your slides are for this, handouts are for learners to look at afterwards, and you can't blend. All right, so I'll give you guys the references for this. So you got a deck you're feeling pretty good about. Now, another rehearsal. This point, it's to a friend again. It's what you feel is good enough for a group. You're going to give one more shot at actually making sure everything you've now refined works. Again, friend, recorded, and I'm going to hand out a feedback form to my friend and actually ask them these questions, and I'll give you this form. But basically, what do the slides look like, what's the delivery like, and what's the overall message? Is it getting really relayed? And I'm going to do my last honing now. I'm going to figure out, are there any other ways I could add more emotion, more story, more rhetoric, more clarity? And then this is the point where I haven't done it during this lecture, but I try to do it during lectures which are not just one-offs, is signposting, which is once you have your deck at a refined state, figure out ways to actually give people the mark of where you're at in the presentation. So if I wanted to signpost this lecture, I might have in the corner a little bit of saying which stage of the lecture I'm at. And I would have told you the structure of the lecture up front. Here are the three things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about, steroids and sepsis, and then I'm going to talk about intubating a sick septic patient, and then I'm going to talk about actually fluid management in sepsis. And for each of those three things on my introductory slide, I'll maybe have a little icon, a laryngoscope, a bag of fluids, and a bottle of hydrocortisone. And then throughout the lecture, either just at the intro slide and the conclusion slide of each section, or during every slide, if it's unobtrusive, I'll signpost it. I'll put that thing there so that people could look up and say, oh, he's at part 2 of his lecture. And this kind of thing, it shows respect for your learners. And I try to build that in to the lectures that are really, they might get lost and not know where they're at. And people want to know when this is ending. Like you'd like to know right now, when is this lecture ending, right? When do I get my coffee? Well, if I signposted the lecture, then you'd know. Okay, and you could do it if you don't have discrete things, like, one clinical thing, you could just put the 7 parts, like my resus wanker talk. If I wanted to signpost that, I could have put, at the bottom, S hitter, and then have a group of 7 boxes with number 2 filled in when I'm on the second one, number 3 filled in when I'm on the third, and then everyone knows exactly where we're at. And when the lecture is internable, they know when an end is in sight. This is a great technique to make your learners feel good. And then I also at this point ask myself, have I rehashed every point I'm trying to make enough in my deck? Should I add in another review slide that brings home the message of what I just talked about and how I'm getting there? Okay. Rehearsal number 5. And for the folks that need to be signposted, there's only one more rehearsal. So we're coming to the end. Rehearsal number 5 needs to be a dress rehearsal. Needs to be you in a suit, if that's how you're going to be speaking at the actual place you want to give this and shine. And it should be to a group. Now, the way I do this for national conferences is I never give a national lecture that I haven't given to my own residents at my shop first, and know exactly how I'm going to give it to them is how I think I'm going to give it at this national level. So it's a dress rehearsal. It's got to be filmed, not just audio tape. It's got to be filmed. And you got to submit a feedback form to these people that they're going to give you back at the end of the lecture. I'll show you that feedback form in a sec. What I want to show you first is you can buy this. This is the Glyph. This holds any sized iPad or Android phone. It's cost you $30. There are cheaper ones, but this one's really nice. You can keep adjusting it as your phone sizes change. And a GorillaPod, which fits into the bottom of the Glyph, which is a tripod you can put anywhere. You could lock it on a chair arm. You could lock it on a table. You could now have the ability, you don't need to buy, Rob's $1,500 camcorder. You just use your phone. The cameras on our phone are better than the professional level gear 5 years ago. So take your phone, you put it in one of these holders, you put it on a tripod, and you film yourself during this dress rehearsal. And then you take the time to watch it later on, and you'll see all the horrible things you do. This is the feedback form I give out. I can't give that same extensive one I expect my wife to be able to go through. It's too much. They're not going to give you real feedback. If you show people 30 questions, they're going to answer 1 or none. And they're just going to find where they could check a box saying your rating, which will always be 9.2. And then that's all they want to do. But if you give them this, you might have a chance of getting some real feedback. And it's simple. Would you change anything about the AV? Is there any concepts that are difficult? How do you think this lecture could be improved? Give me a rating and any overall comments. And this is what I hand out. Based on that, you refine. This is the stage where if you're a good speaker, and I don't do this, I'm not at this level yet. I'm not at the level of true mastery like this woman is. This is Vic Brazel. She does the best, in my mind, stage manipulation in emergency medicine and critical care talks. She looks at this as her stage and actually directs herself on that stage based on her points. She'll stand here for one section. It's planned out. It's written into her presentation. She'll come over here during another one. She's not ad-libbing it. It seems that way because she has such poise and she's done it so much. But everything she's going to do to manipulate her physical space has been planned out. She has this chair she's going to sit down on for a certain point of the talk. You know, when it's a broad-based point, she might be standing here. When it's a specific point she really wants to shine, she'll come stand over here. She might already have planned which portion of the audience she's going to look at. This is really insane level presenting. I have a beautiful post I found about this that I'm going to give you guys afterwards on using the space if you want to take it to that extent. But that's where to do it. You've done your dress rehearsal. Now actually look at your video and say, it would have been much more effective if I wasn't standing behind the podium for that heartbreaking story portion of the talk. All right, this is also where I'm creating my handout. Or I say handout, but I don't do handouts because the physical object is kind of useless. It doesn't really have the value, for me, of handing a web page link to people. And this is where I'm going to create it. I'm going to put all the references people are going to want. I'm going to have my slide set there as a PDF because everyone wants the slides, even though my slides are useless. All you want from my slides are the little references on the bottom, which I've already separated out, but they demand the slides. Your speaker evaluations, they will ding you every time if they don't get your slides, even though there's no utility whatsoever. So just do it. Just accept it that there's going to be people that want your slides. Give it to them as a PDF. You don't have to worry about it being shared that way. And you could do it as like the 9 slide per page PDF that, you know, I think is useless. What the hell am I going to do with that? They love it. I don't know why, but there's just a 5% of the audience will not be happy unless they are told, you will have my slides. So all of you, you will have my slides. All right? Now, you're actually going to give the talk. You're not done yet. In fact, you're not even close to done yet. Because you're going to record that talk. You're definitely going to videotape that talk. You're definitely going to watch that and debrief yourself and say, wow, that worked, that didn't. If your speaker, if your presenter organizer will allow it and will get it to you, then you want feedback from that. You want to read all those and look at what they said. And then as soon as you're done, you want to take notes. You know, you obviously can't do it right afterwards. People want to talk to you. Maybe you want to go to the bar. But at some point soon afterwards, write down what you think worked and what didn't. Do it now. You're going to forget. The next time you give this talk, that stuff's not going to be there. Integrate the notes and then save the recording. That folder, that templated folder I gave you has a folder to put the recordings of your lecture. Put them all in. Because I promise you, when you want to give the lecture 4 years from now again, you're going to forget all the jokes that worked, that the audience actually laughed at. You're going to forget all of the transitions, the segues. Now, you can either redo that all over again, or you can just watch the video of yourself giving it for real one time, and all of that stuff will flood back into your head. If you're not doing that, you're crazy. Because why create a talk that's one-off? That's a complete waste. Do you know how stand-up comics work? You know, you watch them on stage and you think, these guys are funny as shit. Have you ever seen a stand-up comic workshopping their stuff? If you go to some of the dive comedy clubs, you'll see big name performers go in with new material. It sucks. It really does. They're not funny. I mean, they're naturally funny, but this material just blows. And then they workshop it. They work it out in front of the audience. They've already done hours of working it out. And then it gets better and better. This one got a laugh. This one, the wording was wrong. They change it. And they go to bigger clubs, less divey, and then bigger clubs. And finally, after they've given it a couple hundred times, it's ready to actually do the HBO special. Why do we think it would be any different for presentations? One-off presentations suck. The presentation you've given 9 times is wonderful. Now, we're shooting ourselves in the foot with our current generation of social media because we keep recording these things and putting it out for free. And there's a huge beauty to that. I love it. I'm part of the foam world. It also is a big problem because it means if I give a talk at SMAC, that talk is burned. Can't give it again. It means all my talks now are one-offs. That's why I think a podcast is a better method. But this talk, one-off, Rob's told me he's going to put it out there. I want you to put it out there. Put it out there. I'm not going to be able to give this talk to a national conference anymore. So what I'll do, I'll put it on the podcast. But there was a time where you could give a talk to 30 programs for grand rounds and then give it at a national conference and know, even at the national conference, even if they record it, they are only recording it for a paywall. And so few people actually buy those virtual conferences that you know you could give it again. We're starting an age where you can't give these talks again. It's a problem. It's a problem we're going to have to work out because it means most of the talks you're going to see are going to be one-offs and they're not going to be as good. Because what you want to do is just rinse and repeat. You want to keep giving that talk, finding out what worked, what didn't. Wow, I ran over, what could I cut? And the talk just gets better and better and better. All right, so what is this all about? This is about you. The people in this room will be the Amel Matus, the Vic Brazzles of the future. You folks are going to be the presentation masters. The fact that you've committed to coming to this course to get better means you're going to be the future of presentation in medicine. And I want you folks to shine. And with that, I thank you for your attention.